Morning. Just like to talk you through completing the customer operations transactional template. The idea of this document is to provide the information required to complete the customs data against a transport job where agro merchants are the haulier in question. I'm going to go through each section in turn and just try and give you a bit of background about what's involved in trying to complete the different sections. We'll start off with the top left here. So this model at the moment we're talking about is one for a consolidator model. So this document will be predominantly filled in by the suppliers, in this case Tesco suppliers. There will be data added to it by the consolidator, and finally agro merchants will complete the final part before sending off to the customs agent to complete the necessary documents. Because you won't know as the supplier the transport job against which this sits, you don't need to complete this top section. This is only if you've put a transport job onto Agro's transport system through our web portal, in which case, if that's your situation, you would add in the appropriate reference there. Again, you probably won't know what the administration site is that you're dealing with. If you do, you can complete the information there. Any blue boxes, they're for completion by agro merchants, back office staff. So again, you don't need to put any information into those. The green boxes, on the whole, we're looking for a mandatory. That's just, you can see in the key over here, who's usually responsible for completing each section. So on the whole, even if the answer's unknown, we're just looking for some kind of a response, typically, if it's a green box. Okay, so the agro customer name, in this instance, it's basically referring to who's paying for the transport on this particular job. Number of pallets, and then the customer reference. This is important because when we're trying to match up the customs data in our transport system, we need to know the customer reference that we can link this customs information to to our transport job so that we get the correct details paired up. The section down here, sorry, anything in white, that's optional. So if you have any references that you'd like to hold against this, you can put them into there. The yellow section is typically to allow us to create a transport job on the fly using this information and then pairing it up with the customs data. Therefore, what we would ask in this situation is that you complete this core information here about who the addresses are for the collection and the delivery points. This information up here will typically be defined by the fact that this is a standard job, and this will be a consolidator function. So you don't typically need to complete these if you're the supplier. The consolidator will have usually pre-agreed these with agro merchants in advance. On the whole, if you're unsure, there is a drop down there to just help you complete the necessary sections, give you indicators as to what that sort of information would be anyway. My advice would be, if you can complete it because it will just help us. Okay, onto the collection details. As a supplier, the collection point on a consolidated load will be the consolidator's address. So this is typically going to be your end point, not your collection point. The delivery details will be the DC centre in question. So that could be Dublin or Belfast if it's a Tesco movement. Again, don't worry too much about the collection time and date. This will have been largely pre-agreed between the consolidators, Tesco, etc., and agro merchants. This form is a form that we use to capture information for all different types of customers and suppliers. So some of the fields are relevant to you and some are not. Okay, I'm going to move on to the customs header information. So this middle column here, this one relates to the header information for the customs declarations. Again, what we're looking here for is a lowest common denominator approach. So we're looking for as much to be completed in here as you possibly can. There is some help along the way, and I'll point that out as we go. First box there is the Incoterms, so you can choose Incoterms that come into play. You'll notice at the top you get some descriptions about what that Incoterm means, and as you choose different Incoterms, it will update there accordingly. I'm just going to choose one for the time being just to get us going. The next section is to do with the commercial invoice. So this is the basic information aligned to the commercial invoice, and it should match the physical. So we've got the invoice number, the date, the currency in question, and also a total value. The reason that's in red is because at the moment that doesn't match the sum of the parts lower down. I'll explain that in a minute when we get to the product section. The next two fields, IPR and OPR, relate to inward and outward processing relief. Inward and outward processing relief relates to the mechanism whereby goods are sent to a different customs territory to have value added before being brought back to be sold in the original country. Therefore, sometimes this can be used to avoid paying duty on that initial export and import. In most cases, this will be N, no, it's not in question, or it's not in play, and therefore that's why we've set the default to N. The next box there, deferment account reference. If you've got a deferment account that's in play on this particular transaction because of the nature of the Incoterms, you put the deferment account reference in there so that the customs agent can process accordingly. We have a bond status flag. That's just basically yes, no. And then a full load or groupage option. Typically, this will typically be groupage unless you are doing a full load. The next section deals with the consignor and then consignee lower down. We're looking for the URI number for the consignor in the first section. This is typically one of the areas where we notice we get a lot of problems. So once you've entered the EORI number in there, use the check. So if you click on the label at the side, it will open up an external web page and it will tell you as to whether or not the EORI number is in fact valid. In this instance, it is. If we check the one down here, which again, same mechanism, we'll see that that one was a test one that I'd put in. And this one is not valid. If it's not valid, then it won't pass through the customs processing, will be rejected and the goods won't move. So it's important that you check this in advance. Fill in the rest of the information in terms of the country and address. Where you see the TAC, this is if you know the transport system address code. That's typically where AGRO are dealing direct with organisations. They will sometimes know the code that's used, and if you know that, please enter it, but it is optional. Otherwise, you would put in the name and address details into the green boxes below. Typically, this is going to be, if it's a Tesco consolidation job, the GB entity, so the Tesco supplier GB entity, and the Tesco import entity. Okay. Moving on to the right-hand section, you need to declare the country of export and the country of import. Again, typically it's going to be Great Britain in this instance, and Ireland or Northern Ireland. If it's Northern Ireland, it's just going to come up with a flag just to say that this is TSS consignment. that's nothing for you to do particularly. It's just as a flag that it's a different mechanism at play. The blue boxes, again, these will be completed by agro merchants later on, and this will, you wouldn't typically as the customer or supplier know the routing information, so we will complete what ports it's going through and if we're traveling via any intermediate countries. The section to the right then, it's green box, we would expect you to complete it. Where it says self-service, that means, are you expecting to do that particular entity, or are you expecting CCC as the Customs Clearance Consortium to process that submission on your behalf? If you set this to yes, it means that you've got your own customs agent and you'll be providing that information. Therefore, the references associated with that will be required. Hence, the field under the references will turn green and you'll be expected to put in the appropriate reference as provided by your customs agent. If you leave that as N, the expectation is that Customs Clearance Consortium, CCC, will be providing that on your behalf, routing it through agro merchants. Complete that for any appropriate element associated with the Incoterms and the country of export, country of import. It defaults to no because the assumption is that we will be organising that on your behalf for all elements. Moving down to the logistics section, again, it's blue, therefore typically that's going to be an agro merchants, or in the scenario of the seal number, that could be the consolidator who needs to complete that information. If you're sending this form to the consolidator on the way through to agro merchants, the consolidator will typically enrich that by adding the seal number in there before they then send this information on to agro merchants once that vehicle has been sealed. Also, the truck and trailer details if applicable. Moving down, we come to the product section. You need at least one product in here, because otherwise there wouldn't be any point in doing the submission. The system allows you to add up to 99 products, and that's because there's a limitation with the chief system at current. So it will only take 99 products as a group. Every 99 products, it will need to have its own set of MRNs, which are our reference numbers here against these submissions, and there will be a charge per grouping. As in every 99 product codes, you will have a new consignment, and that will attract its own charges and MRN references. So we start off by putting in your product code. That would be typically the customer's supplier's product code, and then the commodity code. So the commodity code, we're looking for 10-digit import commodity code. Maybe that you're only doing the export, but which typically requires 8 digits, but we're asking for the full 10 digits because it covers off all bases. If you put 10 digits, it means you can process anything, any scenario, any document. Again, we've put a check in here, so if you click on the commodity code online check, it will open up the government site and it will give you validation that that commodity code is correct. In the background, we have put some checks in, so if you type it in incorrectly, as long as it's one of the codes that we've set up in the background, it will actually go red and give you a flag to say that we don't recognize that code. We've only set up 15,000 in the background. There are around 50,000. So just because it turns red doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means it's not one of the more common ones that we've validated and put flags in to help you fill in some of the additional information. When I talk about some of the additional information, I mean things like where you get green here, certificate type and number. If this commodity code has, in this instance, SPS controls against it, then it will flag up green here to help you be aware that there's actually additional information that's required. If the boxes stay grey, it means that as far as we're aware, there is no additional information. So if we look at these three codes here, this one, line 1, SPS controls, so needs a certificate, health certificate, and therefore it'll need an export health certificate number. This particular one, this needs a secondary quantity, so it's flagged up the secondary quantity field. Typically this would be on products like fiberboard, where you need a square meterage, or pairs of shoes, where you actually need the numbers of pairs as well as the volume that it's being shipped in. This one is Mersing code, so it's flagged up the Mersing code field, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So you complete the commodity code. If there's a Mersing code, you would complete that. The description of the goods is a basic English description. The country of origin of the goods, the number of packages, the type of packages, the gross weight, net weight, and the item value. The reason that this is in red here, it's picked up that the gross weight entered is less than the net weight. So it's trying to flag up that there's a key in error. If I change that to be either equal or greater, it'll go, the red will disappear. Just to come back to the item value, my current item value for all elements at the breakdown is 1,000. If I compare that against my total invoice, this is 1,050. I need to update one or the other in order to get it to balance. If I update it down here, we now have 1,050. It matches my invoice total and the red flag disappears. So just to come back to the Mersing code. The Mersing code is an extension of the commodity code. It's calculated based on the sucrose, starch, milk fat, milk protein content of the product, and therefore will vary based on the specifics of your product code. If you want some help calculating that, if you don't already know, you can use this tool here. You would put in the different percentage breakdowns of the ingredients, and it will calculate for you the specific Mersing code in this field. So here you can see it's come out at 7942. You would key in that value into this field. Be aware that the values in the drop down are dependent on the previous values. So depending on whether you choose that value will define what values are appropriate here. So if you change this one, ensure that you also change that one, and same with the milk fat, milk protein. I'll show you how that works. So if I go to the equals or greater than 75%, my options on starch are reduced down accordingly. If I choose something with a lower sucrose content, my starch options increase accordingly. And it's the same on the milk fat to milk protein. If I choose greater than or equals 85%, in here there is actually no value for the milk protein. So it depends on which ones you choose as to whether or not you actually get a associated value, because it's all related. And there we get the Mersing code. Okay, that's the whirlwind tour of the form. Once you've completed that, you would save it off and send it along to either Agro Merchants or the consolidator, depending on who you're dealing directly with. One point of note, we are using a type of Excel file for this particular form, which is an XLSB. It means it's slightly more efficient in terms of file size than your typical XLSX. If you just keep that in mind, if you're trying to map to it, it may give you slightly more issues in terms of being able to map against it, but we'll cover that in another video. Thanks for listening, and catch up with you again.